Why were 6 terrified children staring at her like she was performing magic? Lieutenant Marcus Kane stood in the doorway of the refugee ship's galley, watching the peculiar scene unfold, and for the first time in his 3 years with the relief corps, he had absolutely no idea what protocol to follow. The alien girl Lyra, they'd told him her name, was simply stood beside the humming food printer, her silver hair catching the overhead lights like starlight trapped in silk, waiting for her meal to finish heating, while the human children from the colony disaster pressed themselves against the far wall, wide-eyed and trembling. She looked confused, her pointed ears twitching slightly, those luminescent violet eyes searching the room as if trying to solve an equation that kept changing variables. Marcus cleared his throat and stepped inside, the door hissing shut behind him. "Is there a problem here?" The children didn't answer, but the smallest one, a girl no more than 7, with dirt still smudged on her cheeks from the evacuation, whispered something that sounded like "witch" before her older brother shushed her. Lyra's expression shifted not to anger, but to something that looked like sadness mixed with resignation, an expression Marcus suspected she'd worn too many times before. She wore fitted tactical pants in deep blue and a sleek white top with geometric patterns that seemed to shimmer when she moved. Practical, yet somehow elegant, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity that made the children's fear seem even more absurd. "I'm just eating my lunch," she said softly, her accent musical, each word precisely pronounced, as if she'd learned standard through careful study rather than casual conversation. "I didn't mean to frighten anyone." The food printer chimed, and she retrieved a bowl of something that smelled like spiced grain and vegetables, steam rising in delicate spirals. Marcus watched the children's reactions intensify, not with fear now, but with something closer to awe, and suddenly he understood. "You've never seen a food printer before, have you?" he asked the kids gently. The oldest boy, maybe 12, shook his head. "Our colony didn't have nothing like that. We grew everything." Mama said technology like that was lost in the collapse, that only the myths talked about machines that made food from light and air. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Of course. The outer colonies had been founded by traditionalists, people who'd rejected advanced technology, and these children had grown up in agricultural settlements with pre-industrial tools. To them, watching Lyra casually use a device that rearranged molecules into edible matter must have seemed like witnessing a miracle. "It's not magic," Lyra said, kneeling down to the children's level, her voice kind. "Would you like me to explain how it works?" The 7-year-old girl took a tentative step forward. "Are you an angel?" she whispered. "My grandma said angels came from the stars with silver hair and could make food appear, like in the old stories about the wilderness and the bread from heaven." Lyra blinked, clearly not expecting that particular interpretation. And Marcus saw her struggle with how to respond. "I'm not an angel," she said finally. "I'm just someone from very far away. And where I come from, we've had food printers for a long time. They're tools, like a plow or a water pump, just more complicated." But the children didn't look convinced. And over the next hour, as Marcus watched from his position by the door, telling himself he was supervising but really just fascinated, the 6 kids slowly approached Lyra like pilgrims approaching a shrine. She sat cross-legged on the floor, eating her lunch and patiently explaining molecular recombination in terms they might understand, comparing it to baking bread, but with tiny invisible ingredients being mixed by the machine instead of by hand. The children listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking questions that revealed both their innocence and the depth of their isolation. "Can it make anything? Does it hurt the food? Is that why you're so pretty? Because you eat magic food?" Lyra handled each question with grace, and Marcus found himself admiring not just her patience, but the way she never condescended, never made them feel stupid for not knowing. When she offered to print something for them to try, the children gathered around the machine like priests witnessing a sacred ritual, their previous fear transformed into reverence and curiosity. She printed small fruit pastries, explaining each step, letting them press the buttons under her guidance. And when the pastries emerged golden and perfect and still warm, the kids' faces lit up with wonder that made even Marcus's jaded heart feel lighter. "You're good with them," Marcus said later, when the children had been collected by the other refugees for evening meal. Lyra was cleaning the food printer's surface panel, her movements precise and methodical. She glanced at him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "They remind me of the younglings back home," she said, "curious about everything, unafraid to ask questions, seeing wonder where others see only routine. She paused, her expression growing distant. Before the war, I worked at a learning center. 63 children, all different species, all trying to understand a universe bigger than their imagination. The past tense hung heavy in the air. Before the war, Marcus repeated quietly. How long have you been away from home? 4 cycles. Your time. That would be about 5 years. She didn't elaborate, but Marcus had read the reports. Lyra's species, the Aetheri, had been nearly wiped out when their solar system became a battleground between 2 expansionist empires who didn't care about the neutral civilizations caught between them. Survivors were scattered across the galaxy, refugees, just like the human children from the colony, just with better technology and nowhere to use it. Is that why you volunteered for this mission? He asked. The relief corps said you specifically requested assignment to our refugee transport. Lyra set down her cleaning cloth and met his eyes directly. And Marcus felt something shift in his chest at the intensity of her gaze. Because I know what it's like to lose everything and have strangers decide if you're worth saving, she said. I know what it's like to be treated as a curiosity or a threat instead of a person. Those children looked at me with fear because I'm different. But then they looked at me with wonder because I showed them something new. Fear and wonder are very close, Lieutenant Kane. The difference is often just a matter of someone choosing to be kind. It was the most she'd said to him since boarding 3 weeks ago. And Marcus realized he'd been guilty of the same thing. He'd judged the children for keeping his distance because she was different, making assumptions, seeing her as the alien specialist rather than just Lyra. Marcus, he said. You can call me Marcus. Her smile was genuine this time, reaching those remarkable violet eyes. Then you should call me Lyra, not the Aetheri like I've heard some crew members say when they think I can't hear. The next morning, Marcus found himself in the galley again, ostensibly checking the inventory logs, but really hoping to see her. She arrived at her usual time, and he noted she'd timed it to overlap with when the refugee children had their free period. Sure enough, within minutes, all 6 kids shuffled in, less frightened now, more openly curious. Can you show us more? The oldest boy asked. About the food printer? Lyra glanced at Marcus, a question in her expression, and he nodded. Over the following days, those informal sessions became a routine. Lyra would demonstrate the food printer, but she'd also talk about other things: her homeworld's 3 moons, the bioluminescent forests, the music her people made using harmonic crystals. The children shared stories too, about their colony's harvest festivals, about the animals they'd raised, about the families some of them had lost when the disaster struck. Marcus found himself attending more often than duty required, drawn by the warmth that filled the normally sterile galley, by the sound of Lyra's laughter when one of the kids made a joke. By the way, she listened to their stories as if they were the most important things in the universe. He started bringing his own meals during those times, sitting slightly apart but close enough to be included, and gradually Lyra began directing comments his way, pulling him into the circle. Marcus knows about the navigation systems, she'd say. He could explain how we find our way between stars. Or Marcus has been to 17 different worlds. Maybe he's seen a harvest festival like you're describing. She was including him the same way she included the children. And Marcus realized with some embarrassment that he needed it just as much as they did, this sense of community, of connection, of being seen as more than just his function. 3 weeks into the journey, proximity alarms jolted the ship. Marcus rushed to the bridge to find the captain grim-faced, staring at the sensor display showing 3 vessels in pursuit: pirates, raiders who preyed on refugee transports because they knew such ships couldn't fight back without risking the lives of those they protected. We can't outrun them, the captain said, and we can't fight. Shields are passenger grade, weapons are minimal. Marcus's mind raced through scenarios, all of them bad. How long until they're in firing range? 20 minutes, maybe 30 if we push the engines. But that might damage them. Marcus turned to suggest evacuation protocols when Lyra appeared on the bridge, moving with urgent purpose. I can help, she said. My people's ships, the ones that escaped, they had adaptive shield technology. I can modify your shields if you give me access to engineering. And don't ask too many questions about how I know this. The captain looked ready to refuse, but Marcus stepped forward. She's saved the lives of the children on this ship just by being kind to them, he said, surprising himself with his vehemence. I trust her, Lyra's eyes met his across the bridge, and something unspoken passed between them, something that felt like the beginning of a promise. The captain nodded curtly. Do it, Kane. Go with her. They ran through the corridors, Lyra's silver hair streaming behind her, her pointed ears pressed back in a way Marcus now recognized as intense concentration. In engineering, she practically dove into the shield generator's control interface, her fingers flying across holographic displays, rearranging code and power flows with the expertise of someone who'd done this before. You weren't just a teacher, were you? Marcus asked, monitoring the approaching vessels. I was a lot of things before I became someone with nowhere to go, Lyra said, not looking up. Right now I'm someone who refuses to let those children be terrified again. Her hands moved faster, sweat beading on her luminescent skin. The Aetheri learned to adapt our technology when we became prey instead of neighbors. We learned to fight when fighting was the only choice left. The shields hummed, their frequency shifting, and Marcus saw the power readings spike beyond normal parameters. You're overloading the system, he said, alarmed. No, I'm teaching it to dance, Lyra replied, and he heard the ghost of her teacher self in that phrase, the person who explained complex things in simple terms. Shields usually just stand still and take hits. These will move, redistribute, impact, make us harder to target. It won't last long, but it might last long enough. The first impact rocked the ship, sending them both stumbling. Marcus caught Lyra before she fell, his arms around her waist. And for a moment they stood frozen, close enough that he could see the flecks of silver in her violet eyes, could feel her rapid heartbeat against his chest. I've got you, he said quietly, and she nodded, something vulnerable and grateful in her expression, before she pulled back to the controls. The shields held, flexing and shifting with each impact, exactly as she'd promised, buying them precious time. The captain's voice crackled over comms. Relief Corps fleet detected our distress signal reinforcements inbound. 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Might as well have been 7 hours with the pounding they were taking. Marcus watched the shield integrity dropping percentage by percentage, watched Lyra making adjustments faster than should be possible, her face tight with concentration. Then the youngest refugee child's voice came over the ship-wide intercom, bypassing all protocols. Please don't let the angels get hurt. It was naive. It was against every regulation. But it made Lyra's hands pause for just a fraction of a second. She looked at Marcus, and he saw in her eyes what he'd been feeling but hadn't named, that these people, this random collection of refugees and crew, had somehow become worth everything. I'm not going to let anyone get hurt, Lyra said, and Marcus knew she was speaking to him as much as to the child, making a promise she might not be able to keep. She rerouted all non-essential power to the shields, plunging half the ship into darkness, and pushed the generators beyond any safe limit. The engineering bay filled with the smell of burning circuits and ozone. Lyra, it's going to blow, Marcus warned, reading the critical warnings flashing across every display. Not yet, it won't, she said through gritted teeth. Not for 6 more minutes, and she was right. The shields held, flickering and groaning and holding, until the Relief Corps destroyers emerged from jump space with weapons hot and scared the pirates into retreat. When the all-clear sounded, Lyra finally stepped back from the controls, and Marcus caught her again as her legs buckled, exhaustion, claiming what adrenaline had temporarily held at bay. You did it, he said, lowering them both to the floor, letting her lean against him. You saved everyone. We did it, she corrected softly. You trusted me when you had no reason to, except faith. Faith, such a strange word for what he felt, but maybe accurate. Faith that someone who heated lunch in a food printer while children watched in awe could also rewire shield generators to save those same children's lives. Faith that someone from a destroyed world would fight to protect others from experiencing that same loss. The galley gathering that evening was different. The children knew what had happened in the way. Children always know important things, even when adults try to shield them. When Lyra walked in, they didn't ask for demonstrations or stories. The 7-year-old simply walked up and hugged her legs, holding tight, and the others followed until Lyra was surrounded by small humans offering the only thanks they knew how to give. Marcus watched from the doorway as Lyra knelt down, gathering them close, her composure finally cracking as tears slid down her luminescent cheeks. You're all safe, she whispered. That's all that matters. Later, when the children had been settled, and the ship hummed with the quiet of night cycle, Marcus found Lyra back at the food printer, staring at it like it held answers to questions she hadn't asked. "Can't sleep?" he asked, stepping beside her. "Thinking about how strange it is," she said, "that this machine, this simple thing I've used thousands of times without thought, became the thing that connected me to those children. That heating my lunch was somehow a sacred ritual because it represented hope and wonder and the possibility that lost things can be found again." She touched the printer's surface gently, almost reverently. "On my world, we had millions of these. They were so common, so ordinary. Now this one is precious because it was the bridge between their fear and their trust." Marcus understood something then, about loss and value, about how scarcity and connection transform the mundane into the meaningful. "You know what I think?" he said. "I think you're not mourning your world's technology. You're honoring it by using it to teach, to connect, to save. That's not loss. That's legacy." Lyra turned to him, and in her eyes he saw the same thing. He felt the recognition that two people from different worlds, both carrying their own griefs and hopes, had somehow found something unexpected in each other. Not romance exactly, not yet, but the foundation for it: respect, trust, admiration, the sense that together they made each other better. When we reached the settlement station, Lyra said quietly, "I'm supposed to transfer to a different assignment. The Aetheri remnant is gathering on the far colonies. Are you going to go?" Marcus asked, and he heard the hope in his own voice that she'd say no. "I don't know," Lyra admitted. "Part of me wants to be with my people, what's left of them. But another part of me thinks maybe home isn't a place, or even a people. Maybe it's wherever you can make a difference, wherever you're seen for who you are. Wherever heating your lunch can accidentally become a sacred ritual because it sparks wonder and connection." She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could feel the subtle warmth her skin always radiated, could see the way her pointed ears trembled slightly with emotion. "Marcus, in my culture, we have a saying: the stars remember those who choose light over darkness, connection over isolation, hope over despair. I think I'm beginning to understand what that means." Marcus reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull back, and took her hand. Her fingers intertwined with his, and the simple contact felt profound, like a promise being made without words. "I think," he said carefully, "that the relief corps could use someone with your skills. Someone who understands refugees not as a problem to manage, but as people who deserve dignity and wonder and the chance to see that lost things can be recovered in new forms." He paused, gathering courage. "I think I could use someone like that too. Not just as a colleague, but as someone who reminds me why this work matters, why connection matters, why it's worth staying hopeful in a universe that often seems designed to crush hope." Lyra's smile was radiant, more beautiful than any technology, any starlight. "Are you asking me to stay, Lieutenant Marcus Kane? I'm asking you to consider that maybe you've already found what you'd be searching for in the far colonies," he said. "And yes, I'm asking you to stay, but not for me. For those kids who need someone to show them that different doesn't mean dangerous. For the next group of refugees, who will need someone who understands. For yourself, because I see how alive you are when you're teaching and helping and being appreciated for exactly who you are." The food printer hummed softly in the background, a mundane sound that would forever carry new meaning for both of them. Lyra squeezed his hand, and he felt the decision settling over her like starlight finding a place to rest. "Then I'll stay," she said. "I'll request permanent assignment to refugee support operations. And I'll keep teaching children that technology is just a tool for creating wonder. And I'll keep learning what it means to build a new home from the pieces of an old one." She looked up at him, vulnerability and strength perfectly balanced in her expression. "And maybe, if you're patient with me, I'll learn what it means to trust someone with not just my skills, but my heart." Marcus had faced down pirates and engine failures and diplomatic disasters, but nothing had ever required as much courage as saying, "I can be patient. I can be whatever you need while you figure that out." They stood there in the galley, hands joined, while the food printer hummed and the ship carried its precious cargo of refugees toward a new beginning. Somewhere in the sleeping quarters, 6 children dreamed of angels and magic and the kind woman with silver hair who'd shown them that the future could be wonderful if someone took the time to explain it with kindness. And in that quiet moment, Marcus realized the title people would someday give this story about the alien girl who heated her lunch in the food printer, while children gathered like priests witnessing a sacred ritual, would never quite capture the full truth. That sometimes the smallest acts of normalcy become extraordinary when offered with compassion. That technology without humanity is just machinery, but technology with love becomes miracles. And that home is always wherever you find people who see your light and choose to stand in it with you. The next morning, Lyra printed breakfast for all 6 children, and Marcus stood beside her, helping distribute the warm pastries. And when the 7-year-old looked up at them both and said, "You're like a family now," neither of them corrected her. Because maybe that's exactly what they were becoming, a family built not from blood or even species, but from shared purpose and chosen connection. From heating lunch and saving lives and deciding that in a universe vast and often cold, the warmth you create together is the only sacred ritual that truly matters. "What are you thinking?" Lyra asked him later, as they walked the quiet corridors during maintenance shift. "I'm thinking that I spent 3 years doing this work and feeling like I was just processing people through systems," Marcus admitted. "And then you showed up and heated your lunch. And somehow that simple act reminded me that every single person on this ship is someone's whole universe. You didn't save us during that attack, Lyra. You saved us the first day when you chose to be kind to frightened children. Everything else just followed from that." Lyra stopped walking and turned to face him fully, her silver hair cascading over one shoulder, her pointed ears relaxed and content. "Then we saved each other," she said, "because I was drowning in grief and purposelessness, going through the motions of surviving without remembering how to live. Those children, this ship, you reminded me that I'm still a teacher, still a protector, still someone who can make a difference. That's worth more than all the technology my people ever created." She reached up and touched his cheek gently, her luminescent skin warm against his. "So thank you, Marcus Kane, for trusting the strange alien girl with the food printer, for seeing past the pointed ears and the different skin to the person who just wanted to matter again." Marcus covered her hand with his own. "You matter," he said simply. "You matter so much." And there in the corridor, with stars streaming past the viewports and a ship full of refugees sleeping peacefully and the promise of tomorrow humming through every deck, they stood together, human and Aetheri, 2 souls who'd found each other across the vast distances of space, not through grand destiny but through the simple, sacred ritual of choosing kindness, choosing connection, choosing to see the extraordinary in the ordinary and the ordinary in the extraordinary. Proving that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't technology or weapons or even love in its dramatic forms, but simply the decision to heat your lunch and share it with those who hunger for more than food, who hunger for hope, for wonder, for the reminder that they too are sacred, they too are worthy, they too are seen.